Good morning. Last week, when I was traveling out to Southern California to meet a client, I received a phone call early on Friday morning. It was from a attorney in Philadelphia that was due to be sentenced that day. And his first question to me was, Sam, I saw your name on the internet, and I have a question about what I'm going to do after all this is over. What can I possibly do? What kind of job can I find? And it kind of struck me as unusual that he wasn't worried about his sentencing. He wasn't worried about what was going to happen to him at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Instead, he was worrying about what could happen years down the road. And I spent about a half hour with him, even though I wasn't retained, trying to explain what little he could do that afternoon, what questions he needed to have his attorney ask, uh, you know, as far as designation and surrender date. Not much time, but we did speak for a while, and I think he got quite a bit out of it. He called me later that afternoon after he'd been sentenced, and he received a sentence of 24 months. And his next question to me was, I can't do this. It seems like a lot of time. Do I qualify for a compassionate release? And again, I thought that was a very unusual question at the time, and then it dawned on me. How many times do people call me after they're sentenced or as soon as they surrender and ask, do I qualify for a compassionate release? I have a client in Pensacola sentenced to a little bit over 5 years who has 11 children. And he reached out to me last week with an identical question. My wife is having a really challenging time raising 11 children. He's a young guy. Do you think I qualify for a compassionate release? And I explained to him a compassionate release, while legally available to everyone who has a compelling reason to request one, is a very, very difficult thing to accomplish. On average, less than 1% of requests are granted. And even then, usually it's for an overwhelming illness or medical reason, whether it's your medical situation, maybe a spouse, but there has to be an overwhelming reason to justify you getting a compassionate release. And of all the early releases that might be available to someone, that's the least likely to occur. So I wanted to do a brief video on the different tools and resources that one might need to request a compassionate release. But really more important, to try to explain to people the need not to focus on what tricks or what might be available to you to get out of prison early. But more important, what you can do now before you've been sentenced to get the best possible outcome in sentencing. And if you've been sentenced, there are still ways to come up with a game plan to get an earlier release than what the judge might have given you. And I always tell people that the number at sentencing is strictly a starting point. That's not the number you're going to serve. Many of my clients serve 30 to 50% of that number, sometimes less. What tools you employ now, what knowledge you have now, what information you have now is the key to spending the least possible amount of time in a custodial environment. The goal is to get you back to your family as quickly as possible. So I encourage you, read the attached blog and give me a call. Thank you.